rumination and worry takes you out of the present. If you're not in the present, that's where life's lived. That's where choices are made. That's where things are cleaned up. That's where values make a difference. So learning from the past to be in the present, to be more effective, that's fine. Disappearing into the past, both of those is ornaments that you put on ineffectiveness. They are heavy weights that drag you down and keep you from being where you need to be able to make a difference, which is here, now, as a whole person, consciously. I don't think thinking about the past, learning from the past is the same thing as rumination. The difference is if you notice that your wheels are spinning, that you're coming back to it repeatedly, that it doesn't seem to empower really the kind of change that you want, and yet you almost involuntarily loop back, that's the time to push the reset button, step back, use your diffusion and mindfulness skills. Notice what your mind is doing. Thank your mind for trying to help you. It's not trying to hurt you. You need those skills when you're doing your taxes or fixing your car, but you do not need them when you're dealing with your history, because your history is not going to change. The only thing you do with history is learn from it. And when you learn from it, you apply what you learn now, not back then. That's not going to happen again. The mind will easily put you into this idea of if you can figure it all out, you're going to get better. When research is done on that, rumination makes you less able to step up to current challenges. Worry makes you less able. Tells you it's going to make you more able. That's not what actually happens. Watch your own life and you'll see it.
This week on the By Your Side Autism Podcast, Dr. Stephen C. Hayes. Dr. Stephen C. Hayes is a foundation professor of psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and is the author of 46 books, including Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, which for a time was the best-selling self-help book in the United States, and his new book, A Liberated Mind. He's especially known for his work on acceptance and commitment therapy, or otherwise known as ACT. ACT encourages people to embrace their thoughts and feelings rather than fighting or feeling guilty for them. ACT develops psychological flexibility and is a form of behavioral therapy that combines mindfulness skills with the practice of self-acceptance. Anxiety, depression, OCD, and addictions can all benefit from ACT and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. An expert on the importance of acceptance, mindfulness, and values, he is ranked among the most cited psychologists in the world, and his TED Talks have been viewed by over 600,000 people. There is no better expert on ACT than Dr. Hayes. So jumping right into a conversation of acceptance and commitment therapy, I start with the question, are we our thoughts?
I don't think so, and if you are, you're in real trouble because it's so easy. And I'm explaining this to folks, I will do a little bit of programming. I'll say something like, suppose it was really, really, really critical that you remember what I'm about to say. You're going to win $1 million a year from now if I ask you what it is and you tell me, okay, so it's really important. And what I want you to remember the numbers 1, 2, 3. What are they?
Say 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely, you do. Okay, you said it once. Now, if I came back a year from now, do you think you could do it?
Yes.
Of course you could. Well, that means anybody can program you for years and maybe forever, because there's no delete button in the nervous system. Once something goes in, it's in. It may be buried. It may be hard to find, but people probably learned in their psychology class that there's actually no such thing as complete forgetting. There's inhibition. And what happens is the things that we see on a television screen or that, people say to us and so forth are all dumped into this mixer. And then it has a life of its own because these different thoughts can connect to each other. And while you're asleep, it's doing it. Have you ever been awakened from a dream? And for the next few hours, life is just a little different. Something's off. And you may then have flickers of that dream and realize, oh, it's because I was thinking about this. But of course, you didn't do it voluntarily. If you don't learn how to put the mind on a leash, to take one step up, to use it when it's useful, to step back when it isn't, you're at the mercy of whatever program you got. And you better cross your fingers or pray, because a lot of the stuff going into the mixer is not stuff that you would like in there.
What are the coping strategies to take those thoughts that you're trying to suppress? And I think you had a quote something about you don't try to win a war inside your head if you knew a way to step out of it.
Yeah, the things that we do to try to manage the cacophony within, things like getting anxious for no particular reason, are usually problem-solving strategies because we're so used to doing that when we're dealing with external things that can actually be subtracted, removed, eliminated, changed. You can, scrape the peeling paint off your walls and repaint. You can get out the vacuum cleaner and vacuum up the rug. But what are you going to do with a painful thought, with a difficult memory? Well, the logical, reasonable, sensible, and pathological thing to do is to treat it like dirt on the carpet or paint on the walls, in which you simply bring the skills that you think you have to be able to eliminate it, subtract it, and make it go away. But as you do that, since there's no delete button in the nervous system, every single effort that you make has made it easier to access that material. If you push out a thought, for example, I'm just not going to think about it. Well, then you get into like a bad, mobile phone commercial. Am I there yet? Am I there yet? Am I there yet? And every time you ask, you just made it easier to access, because in order to ask that question, you have to know what you're trying to avoid. And if you know what you're trying to avoid, then you've not avoided it. You've grooved it. You've made it easier. So we get these self-amplifying loops where for just a few minutes, when you push out, distract, look away, suppress, it looks as though the problem-solving strategy is working. And then you go out an hour later or days later, and because it's grooved now, it's more easily accessible. It starts showing up more. So you do the thing you did last time to push it down, and it works for a few minutes, and then you're more likely to have it show up again. Well, that's a kind of a self-amplifying train wreck. I mean, it is how people sink into depression or panic disorder or the kind of numbness and stumbling through that sometimes we get into when we have such a hard challenges. And one thing that I can say that's kind of cool is that behavioral science has figured out a way, number one. Number two, it deeply resonates with our cultural and wisdom traditions if you can stop just doing problem solving. And number three, you already know it already. You just haven't remembered it. You know how to deal with things in a way that's not simply problem solving. And so it's kind of more like taking skills that you have off in the corner, bringing them out, polishing them off, dusting them off, and learning how to use it in this situation. And that's what ACT does.
And cognitive diffusion, is that part of how to break that cycle?
Diffusion is simply learning to notice your thoughts as thoughts and to, use them if they're useful and do nothing else with them if they're not. And we have the capacity to step back and look at things. We do that naturally. If you saw a sunset tonight, you'd step back, appreciate, observe, and describe. You wouldn't try to solve the problem. You wouldn't say, God, that if the cloud was shaped this way, it would be a better sunset. If there was a little more blue, it'd be a better sunset. You're just going to go, wow. So we know, good and bad, how to step back, observe, describe, and appreciate. It's just that our problem-solving mind is so overfed in the modern world that we go to it as our go-to method for everything, even when it doesn't work. So when you have difficult thoughts, you need to bring that sunset mode of mind that you've got in there to step back, to look, to notice, hey, I'm having that thought. You might even notice when you do that this is something that your mother said or your dad said, or this is something that your sibling said, or this is something that you heard on television. And that just that little separation, that little distance is like opening a window in a stifling room, and it lets a little bit of air in. And now you have an option. And one option would be just to notice the thought. And if it's not helpful, to respectfully decline its invitation to do anything with it, and instead now move your attention to what's of more importance. And that's not distraction, that's attraction. When you distract, you have to remember what you're trying to avoid. When you attract, you focus on more important things. And so learning the attentional flexibility, once you step back just a little bit to notice thinking and flight, and then, okay, what's of importance here? Is that a thought that's really helpful? And if you have a thought like, hey, your taxes haven't been filed yet, and the deadline's tomorrow. Thank God for a brain that does that. If you have a thought that's something more like, I will never get over that horrible experience, that's not a thought that's going to very likely to be helpful. So you have to learn how to put your mind on a leash, to take what's useful and leave the rest. And it's not logical. It's not reason. It's not arguing. And so you don't argue with the difficult voices within. You learn to treat them like you would the kids in the back seat of the car that are arguing. You let it go through you like water through a sieve, and you focus on the road and what's important.
Do we try to answer too many questions? That's a fool's game. And your recommendation is, just acknowledge you're feeling this and just move from there.
When you deal with a thought or a feeling or a memory or sensation that's difficult, and you find that it loops back, it gets more central, it gets sticky, it gets in the way, time for something different. If you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you've been getting. And if that's what you're getting and it's not working, time for something different. And very likely it's that you've been drawn into a logical problem-solving agenda instead of a step back, observe, appreciate, and describe agenda. Those are two different skills. You've got both skills. You use them sometimes. You know to look at a sunset and not criticize it, or to hug a crying child and not try to criticize them or make it just go away when it's not going to go away. So bring those skills, learn them, build them out. There's all these books that will help, and then apply them to this moment and see how it works. Not how it works in terms of eliminating the thought. That's the agenda your mind gave you that you have to subtract and eliminate. But how it works in opening up alternatives that then when you put your life's effort into it, gradually, piece by piece, gives you a way forward that builds and broadens and uplifts and empowers.
As we continue our conversation, I invited a BCBA, Emily Brown, into my office during the interview. It was Emily who informed me of ACT, and she's a big fan of Dr. Hayes. Emily had a question for Dr. Hayes, and she starts us off in this segment.
My biggest question would be, when we're meeting with families often, we're really trying to incorporate, values. What are they seeking? What are they navigating? What would you recommend to parents if they were considering trying to learn more about ACT and starting to incorporate those strategies, kind of where to start for themselves?
Well, if just know ACT and psychological flexibility, just those two terms, you can find a massive amount of supports that are out there, basically even for free, just to start. I mean, you'll find TED Talks, and you'll find free things on the web and groups that are using these methods. You can put your toe in the water, in other words, and explore it a little bit at no cost or very low cost. If you want to see it from 35,000 feet, and kind of understand why it matters, a book like A Liberated Mind, excuse me for the commercial, but it's a trade book that I wrote recently. It's done very, very well. That tells the whole story of psychological flexibility. It has a lot of personal stories in it. And so it's the science story, but it's also a self-help book, really, giving people enough skills. You mentioned Get Out of Your Mind and Your Life. That was the first popular general self-help book in ACT in 2006. It's still very, very good. Another one that people like is The Happiness Trap, written by my colleague Russ Harris, who's an Australian physician. There is a group I rather like, which is called ACT for the Public. It's at groups.io. It's free. It's been going on for 12 years or so. It's about 2,000 people on this journey. And there's some really, really, really wise folks just normal people who've been using ACT in their lives now for like 10 years and just like helping people. And there's a few therapists, myself, Russ, a few others who hang out there, and occasionally I read every post. So that's an example of a free resource of just wise old birds out there who know what you're talking about when you're talking about acceptance and what is diffusion and et cetera. Because there's a lot to learn, these skills. I mean, what makes it so hard is our analytic judgmental mind is always coming up, running to the front of the parade and saying, hey, I understand. And yeah, that's great. And then next thing you know, it's going to advise us to do more of the same. It's harder to listen to those more quiet voices, learning how to be psychologically flexible and to use the judgmental mind without having it just be the whole of you or use you. So those are some of the things I'd recommend. And then if I could add, two things. If you get far enough in there, you know that there's special issues like, well, how would I apply this to parenting? How would I apply this to diet and exercise? How would I apply this to my work? And turns out there's something like, golly, now 70 self-help books on ACT for almost everything that you can name. And it's so well established that if you go to the World Health Organization and you want to help with COVID, the one thing they'll offer to you is an ACT cartoon book and audio tapes as to how to use it in 18 different languages. I mean, it's at that level now. But you can get self-help books that are targeted. And then finally, I want to mention, go to contextualscience.org. And if you want to find an ACT therapist, they have a list of about 5,000 to 6,000 ACT therapists there. BCBAs and psychologists and psychiatrists and OTs and PTs, all different kinds for different purposes. And there's a big directory and you can go through and search for your local area. And then the final thing, if I could, if you want to follow just my thinking, I send out a newsletter about every month, and just go to stephenchayes.com and click on yes, please send it to me. I don't spam people. It's a one-click opt-out if I ever break that rule. So if something I'm saying that sounds interesting, you can follow my blogs like on Psychology Today and other places easily just by getting my monthly newsletter.
Do people have to like themselves first, or does ACT allow you to start liking yourself, to treat yourself well? Like, where does self-forgiveness fit into all this?
It fits in a profound way, and nothing is really first because it all fits together. There's 6 different flexibility skills. They're like sides of a box. If you eliminate any side, the box gets weaker. If you eliminated a number of them, there's no box at all. This core skill that you're talking about, now I'd change it from like to love, because like is kind of an emotional response. There's probably lots of things you do, you think, you remember, you find yourself being prideful, being selfish, there's probably long lists of things that you will never like about yourself. And that's okay, because we can notice that, learn from it, and tweak it a little bit. But what you need, I think, is something more like loving yourself. And it's in the flexibility skills of finding the person deep within who you really are, that deep-seated sense of consciousness that connects you to others, and putting a period after the sentence that's no longer conditional. You belong. You're here. And your thoughts, your feelings, your memories are of importance. You are of importance. And so that kind of stance of treating yourself with self-kindness, self-compassion, to love yourself and do what you know how to do with others the way you love your kid. It's unconditional. There's nothing that could ever change it. Do that with yourself, and then work on all the things that you need to develop. And in the ACT work, we try to teach people how to do that by finding this deeper sense of self that doesn't have attributes and features and so forth, but is more simply conscious and aware. And that more spiritual part of yourself is worthy of aligning with and saying, okay, I'm thoroughly made. I'm here. If you want the Latin word for thoroughly made, it's per. That means thoroughly. Fect means made. I'm perfect and whole as a conscious human being. My consciousness is not broken. My deep sense of self, my more spiritual self, is not broken. Now, let's work on all the things that I need to change about myself and all the things that I came here to do that will help in the world with the people that I love.
guilt is something in my 12 years, I run across a lot, whether it's guilt of their child being on the spectrum or guilt they're not doing something correctly. I know that falls into the same category, what you just said, but that one's a little probably trickier because it's not something working on yourself. But I guess the part of working on yourself would be stop feeling guilty. Is it as simple as that?
No, I think guilt is tricky because you really want to distinguish shame from guilt. And often what people really mean is a sense of shame. And you can tell the difference between the kind of guilt that spills over into you're bad, that you're really entering into the shame territory. And when we work to separate those and actually look at how they roll out, guilt meaning only noticing something that you did that didn't work, taking responsibility for it and trying to clean it up. That's actually helpful to the trajectory of life. Guilt that you get wrapped around, almost always has this quality of I'm bad. And the metaphor I use, it's like cutting yourself off at the knees and then saying, okay, let's go run a race. You just made everything so much harder by buying into that idea that deep down there's something wrong with you. And you don't have to do that. You can decline the invitation of that dictator within and respectfully decline the invitation to treat yourself that harshly and unkindly. And that more loving stance with yourself will empower yourself to have a range of emotions, and they can include guilt and regret. We do make mistakes. That's not your enemy. That could be helpful too in cleaning up mistakes. But shame is a different deal. That's a toxic soup that looks like it's about helping you, but it's grease on the wheels of more of the same. If you look at it, when you feel, for example, you probably all tried to lose weight or exercise more or something, and then you slip. Well, duh. Nobody, do you know anybody who just says, I'm going to do it, and then it's 100% for forever from there? No, they slip. But then that voice within says, see there, you can't do it. You'll never be able to do it. There's something wrong with you. You can't. And so if you're on a diet, now it's time to, binge a gallon of ice cream. If you're not exercising, it's time to become a couch potato and let go of your program. And that the grease on the wheels of that is the I'm bad part of shame. You have nothing to be ashamed of, dude. Really, literally, that emotion is not helpful to you. Guilt can be held properly.
Toxic soup. I love that image. It's so telling. I'm fascinated by traps because many times you have thoughts, and then when they go too far, that's when it becomes dangerous. Is there a balance of using pain in your past to learn from your mistakes, but then that dwelling in your past that you're stuck? Exactly. So, rumination and worry takes you out of the present. If you're not in the present, that's where life's lived. That's where choices are made. That's where things are cleaned up, where opportunities are. That's where values make a difference. That's where what we really intend makes a difference. That's where all the things we're going to do to try to help our loved ones make a difference. So learning from the past to be in the present, to be more effective, that's fine. Disappearing into the past or the worried conceptualized future, both of those, if you just look at your own life, rumination and worry is, ornaments that you put on ineffectiveness. They are heavy kind of weights that drag you down and keep you from being where you need to be able to make a difference, which is here, now, as a whole person, consciously. I don't think thinking about the past, learning from the past is the same thing as rumination. The difference is if you notice that your wheels are spinning, that you're coming back to it repeatedly, that it doesn't seem to empower really the kind of change that you want, and yet you almost involuntarily loop back, that's a time to push the reset button, step back, use your diffusion and mindfulness skills. Notice what your mind is doing. Thank your mind for trying to help you. It's not trying to hurt you. You need those skills when you're doing your taxes or fixing your car, but you do not need them when you're dealing with your history, because your history is not going to change. The only thing you do with history is learn from it. And when you learn from it, you apply what you learn now, not back then. That's not going to happen again. And the mind will easily put you into this idea of, if you can figure it all out, you're going to get better. When research is done on that,
Rumination makes you less able to step up to current challenges. Worry makes you less able. Tells you it's going to make you more able. That's not what actually happens. Watch your own life and you'll see it. And these are the markers. These are the, by your fruits you shall know the markers. You can learn from your own experience if you can get enough flexibility, variability, and awareness to be able to learn. I mean, after all, you learned to walk and you fell down 110 times a day under your diapered butt. That's how you learned. But you eventually learned, and it took you a lot of falls to do it. In the same way, some of these skills we have in front of us are going to take a lot of falls, and none of us are going to ever able to master all of them. But we can make progress. So if you have a sense that you're looping back, push the reset button, back up, become aware of the invitation to do it, start declining that invitation and focusing on your values and what's present and how to put your foot in front of the other towards the things that you really want to manifest in your life, which is here and now.
Moving on to the acceptance part, I know this is all intertwined, so it's not really moving on. It's in addition to. Now, ACT, it's one word, not ACT. It is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Can you give your definition of what acceptance means in the ACT model?
It just means to receive the gift that's offered by your history. And we actually have that in English. If you give this a precious thing to someone, you may say, here, will you accept this? You don't say, would you tolerate this? Would you resign yourself to this? That's not what you mean. You mean, this is so precious, this gift that I'm giving you, is I'm asking you willingly to receive it. Well, our history is a precious gift because it's how we know what has happened in the past that informs how to do better in the present. And so even if they're painful gifts, I mean, after all, if you, for example, are feeling the sadness of a loss of a loved one, yeah, but that sadness contains a gift. It's the gift of your knowledge towards the loved one and the importance that you have of relationships like that and how that could then inform what's going to happen today. Are you going to build loving relationships, the kind that you would weep over if they went away today? Your mind might say, oh, don't do that. They're going to go away. It'll sort of tell you that, the happy numb is the way to be happy. Well, numb is not happy. You just check in on that. That's not happy. I mean, sweet contains bitter. I mean, the reason that we cry at a wedding or at a birth is that we know there's painful things going forward. And yet the courage of human beings to commit to a relationship or to bring new life into the world, knowing all the risks. I mean, it's amazing that we do it. That kind of emotional flexibility will allow you to do hard things. When ACT became popular, was written up in its first wave of popularity, was written up in Time magazine in a 5-page story, and I had my 5 minutes of fame. And Get Out of Your Mind and Your Life beat Harry Potter for one glorious week.
High praise.
When that happened, one of the first things that happened is that you're just teaching people to accept their life. That's just some sort of elitist thing to tell people who are downtrodden and abused that they shouldn't. Well, fortunately, we had already had research that showed the exact opposite. Bank workers, which is a really hard job. You have to call people constantly and tell them that they're not, they're behind on their payments and they have to pay their loan. And well, what did they do when we taught them acceptance skills? They started asking for changes and even demanding changes in their work environment. I think that's cool. In other words, we're living inside emotional cages And the bars are made up of you can't feel this and you can't feel that. If you're open to your feelings, you can do hard things. You can walk in there and demand changes from the school that needs to happen, and to do it with the emotions that this is hard and, it makes me really anxious even to do it. And I wish somebody else would. And I'm angry that I'm even in this situation and so on. So emotional openness is not wallowing. It's learning how to let your emotions do what they came to do, which is to guide you and to empower you and motivate you. I mean, the very word emotion contains it. That word motion is in the word for a reason. The Latin root means to get going. And so we want those supports to stand up and get going.
What's great about the workbook is that, and you mentioned earlier, most of what this is about, the tools are already in your toolbox. And what I found very useful, not only talking about openness, but connecting all this, and all this is connected, is values. And values, that really clicked with me when I go, well, how does this all, treat myself better, the thoughts, all that. When you talk about the values and go, oh, my core values are going to drive how I build myself up or handle my thoughts.
Yeah, because it's the reason why this all matters. I mean, if you work on these emotional and cognitive openness skills and these sort of attentional skills and sense of self work that allow you to take advantage of the past and to show up in the present, the next question is, and then what? What do I want my actual life's moments to be about? And values are the answer to that question. What are the deep, intrinsic qualities of what you do that you want to manifest in the world? And there's 4 ways I know of that quickly get you to that. One is to take the things that are emotionally hard and flip them over and look at what does that suggest. If you're entangled with anger or anxiety and you flip it over, you'll often find a little whisper. I say this to people, it's one of these complicated sentences. I said, what would you have to not care about that emotion? And if you take something like, let's say, sadness and anger linked to how your child is progressing or being treated, the flip side of that is the love you have for your child. That's the values piece of that. Now you get it wrapped around the emotions, you may actually not get to that part in a way that's clean. If you're depressed, you probably are yearning to feel again. If you're socially anxious, you probably want to learn how to be with people in a way that creates belonging, and on and it goes. Take your heroes, the people you look up to, and slow it down and look at what are the qualities of being and doing that person is revealing to you such that they are a hero. That's very likely really what your values are. What would it take for you to put in your life's moments some of those same qualities? I'll give an example. My mom is a hero to me. She suffered greatly and really kept her sense of kindness. As you used to say things like, in every life, a little rain must fall, meaning when you're dealing with folks who'd want to judge and say, rah, 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 take their perspective, soften it. And, knowing her history, I know some of the hard-won wisdom that is. And time to walk through it. I've written about it in Liberated Mind, my latest book, and so forth. But so that can be helpful to me if I'm, getting too quick or something with yet another email request for this or that. Mom's voice can help guide me a little bit. And then the fourth one would be, if you're writing your life as a story and you really had to control not over who's in the story, not over the elements, not the challenges, but the arc of the story. Are you writing a tragedy right now? Or are you writing a hero's journey? The hero's journey concludes all these challenges. Frodo may feel, I just can't do it. It's too much. And yet finds with his friends and his deep commitment to confronting evil, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to throw that ring into, in the arc of all our great stories have that thing of thoughts, feelings, memories, sense of self being a challenge, coming into the present moment, finding our values, aligning with our friends who can help us with it, and then taking charge and a committed action that gets the golden fleece, or that defeats the evil emperor, or throws the ring into the crack of doom. The reason why we love those stories is they're our stories. We've been invited to be on a hero's journey. How are you going to deal with your difficult history, show up in this present moment, and focus on the challenges that are deep and values-based, and mobilize your behavioral resources to that? Leap into a future that can be about something that's big, that's as deep and meaningful to you as you know how to choose deep and meaningful things. That's a great life adventure, to be on something like that.
I just want to touch on mindfulness because it's another one of the pillars. And again, working from your workbook, I always view meditation, mindfulness like exercise. Like I know I should do it and I don't. And again, if I may just read from this, I love the simplicity of the mindfulness. You write, and I'll just read a couple sentences where you have someone just boil a pot of water and steep some tea. And you say, now place your hands around the outside of the warm cup. Have you ever felt a cup of tea like this before? How does it feel? Is it quite hot or just warm? Note the temperature. Bring the cup to your lips. Feel the steam as it touches your face. And it goes on. How important is the mindfulness piece?
Well, it's how we bring ourselves into the present moment and deepen our contact with the present, inside and out. And all of the major wisdom and religious traditions include it, whether it's contemplative prayer or chanting or silence or koans or something. They include something to rein in the judgmental mind and show up into the present moment. And so I like a wide range of mindfulness skills that can start where you are, because the simplest thing of simply feeling what that cup of tea feels like, done as an exercise over and over and over again, is tantamount to what I sometimes do in the grocery store when I'm working on my biceps, which is I'll do some curls with a jug of milk as I walk down the aisles. I mean, you can do things that are sort of just built in that are helpful. And we can build in mindfulness skills the way you might build in parking a little bit farther away from the front door so that you can get a little bit of exercise on the way into the mall. Mental health isn't like a 1 out of 5 thing. You don't need a big label and so forth. It's a 5 out of 5 thing. And it's about mental strength and mental flexibility. And ACT is about mental strength and mental flexibility. And these mindfulness skills can be practiced and put into your life in 100 different ways. It's the skills that allow you to come into the present moment fully, to appreciate it, to savor it, to notice it, to see what its features are. That example you had with a tea. Suppose you're getting bumped around by some difficult thoughts or emotions today, and you go down that rabbit hole again. You're going to be going into rumination, resentment. You're going to be struggling, and guess what's not happening? Values-based action isn't happening. Your life is not happening. If you caught that, a really good thing might be to do right this moment, reach out to that cup of tea in front of you and do that little exercise. Nirbe Singh, who's the editor of the journal Mindfulness and is a behavior analyst and works with children with developmental disabilities and parents and stuff, and has developed this really cool mindfulness exercise called the soles of the feet. And what he does is he teaches people simply to push a pause button and to notice the sole of one of your feet and what it feels like, where it's hot or cold, without moving and wiggling, to try to actually sense its shape and so forth. And then as he goes along, we'll have them shift to focusing on from one foot to the other foot. And then later on to focus on both feet. Well, that simple skill, when work done with children with developmental disabilities, can reduce kind of things like violence in the schoolyard by these major, major ways. And the same thing with parents. being able to push the reset button and come into the present moment sort of dampens down some of our impulsive worst instincts around issues like anger. There's a lot of ways to do that other than simply following the breath and 10-day silent retreats and all of that, which are great. They're wonderful. And I love them when I do them. And I do some forms of that. But I really think for most people, they need to build in these constant flow of little micro mindfulness or present moment awareness exercises.
I'm encouraged to see mental health talked about more and more. I was watching football. Jay Glazer did a whole interview at a football player with mental health, and to see the football community and even the announcers spend 5 minutes talking about it and saying how important this is. And
yeah, I love that. And there's a group that I work with, hashtag same here, will take you to it, of a whole bunch of influencers and athletes, and coming out of a guy, Eric Cassine, who is a administrator for major athletic teams. This is a 5 out of 5 issue, not a 1 out of 5 issue. And it's a 24/7 issue, not a 1 hour a week issue. And so let's get on the same page and stop this conspiracy of silence in which our heroes, our athletes and so forth, are held up in, oh, they don't have any struggles. They don't have any issues. Our children are internalizing those kind of messages, and they're lies. They're false. Anyone that you know well has lots of things that they're struggling with, lots. And that doesn't mean, oh, woe is me. It means, no, that's the human condition, and that's the hero's journey we're on. So let's work together in this compassionate way of allowing us to work through our human vulnerabilities, not excusing it, not saying, oh, well, it's okay that you did this or that, because I don't mean that. No, we still can hold each other to account, to be responsible and to be able to handle difficult emotions and so forth. But we're more likely to do that if we're open, talking to each other, supporting each other. This pretense, this persona, this clay mask, the Greek word for persona was a clay mask. And enough already. We're human beings, and let's begin to get about creating a culture that empowers all of us, including our children, who we all know are going to face the same challenges we did. And they are going to learn from what? From the adult models around them. That's what they're going to learn from. So if you really care about your kids, you need to really care about yourself and the people that you love, and creating a softer, kinder, more empowering culture.
Emily, would you like to do the honors and close us out with the final question?
I think my last question would be, obviously, ACT, I feel like it's been pretty revolutionary. What do you feel like you would hope to see clinicians do, and like how do you, with it in the future, how it could maybe continue to change and evolve?
Well, for the therapists, I think we're headed into a more sophisticated era of ACT being the foundation for a process-based approach that is linked to an individual functional analytic approach. And if you're a BCBA, that should be music to your ears.
It surely is.
But how to do that, I can tell you there's some things coming analytically in terms of measures, in terms of the underlying actual empirical ways that those are evaluated, that are very different. And there it gets very geeky. If I can just give myself 2 sentences, thanks for allowing it. We've done this work by including the psychological flexibility model into an extended evolutionary model, and then creating measures and analytic systems that we call idionomic, that start with the individual and then are scaled to nomothetic generalizations. Instead of top-down normative categories, you have this, you are that. Instead, bottom-up functional analytic idionomic categories that allow you to see the similarities between one person and another person without ever fuzzing them in this harmful way of treating them as an error term, which is what most of mainstream behavioral science does. That's a big journey, because it means fighting down these normative categories that we've lived inside for 150 years, ever since Galton figured out standard deviations and how to do the science of individual differences, which was not about individuals, it was about differences. So your child has autism, has this, it's so far beyond the details of that human being we're talking about, your child. There's so many different combinations and ways and processes and so forth and stages of development. So top-down categorical concepts are just never going to humanize our culture. And that's the bigger journey we're on, is bottom-up, fitted categories, yes, but that are fitted to the person so precisely that they never treat people as if they're just an error term inside a collective. Enough of that.
Oh, no, I'm sure I'll reflect on that for a while.
There's some cool, if there's any therapists listening to that and they say, man, that's cool, follow the work on process-based therapy, which is not a new form of therapy. It's a new way to think about what evidence-based therapy is. It's implicit in the ACT model and the ACT journey, and we're now trying to put it there as a more general approach to how to create scientifically based tools that you can use that are fitted to individuals instead of categories that are put atop people and, asking them to live inside a cage, a conceptual cage. And we've done that so much. You have friends who probably say, well, I have major depression almost in the first paragraph or whatever it might be. And boy, that is just not going to serve us because there's 1,000 different ways that those categories apply. And often they misapply and misdirect us from what the individual needs are that need to be stepped up to.
You've been listening to the By Your Side Autism Podcast. I've been your host, Matthew Croak. If you have any guest or topic ideas you'd like me to discuss, send an email to podcast@byyoursideac.com. That's BYOURSIDEAC.com. To support this show, simply subscribe or leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for listening.
Views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not necessarily reflect the policy or position of By Your Side. This podcast is meant to inform, understand, and entertain.